Hello, today is a really powerful day in this cycle, and it's Friday, the 3rd of September, and we're on day 3. It's all aligning, matching up literally with the Gregorian calendar and the Mayan dream spell right now. So, day 3 of the 260-day cycle that's just begun, which is in Virgo. And so it's all about purification of the conditioned mindset on one level. Reconnecting, recalibrating, re-engineering ourselves back to who we really are in the sacred feminine, balance, the goddess, releasing all this brainwashing that we've had in order to fit into this society model in the West that we have today, and how that shaped our behaviour, how that shaped distorting us in so many ways, and how we're learning new ways of being in order to repattern ourselves. One of the most important things about becoming a conscious dreamer is about being willing to look at your own personal health story in order to heal it. And one of the key teachings that I've discovered about this over the last 14 years is how to use emotional freedom technique to get clear of the old ancestral wounding story. Emotional freedom technique is an amazing tool to use. Many people know about it, and there's loads of free resources out there, so do go and check it out, do Google it. If you go on emofree.com, that's Gary Craig's website. He was the designer of this particular framework of emotional freedom technique. And of course, there's many, many different variations of this. And it's an ancient alchemy tool. And so it works on talking about the issue that you've got that's bugging you, pushing your buttons, and creating emotion for you. As you talk, you tap on key points, and these points, this is where the Eastern structure comes in. These are acupuncture points, and so this is working with chi, with energy, and at the same time we're working with feeling the feeling. I know lots of people who do EFT and they're not feeling feeling, and this is all about feeling the feelings. That is where we have to go to reset our sat-nav, our amygdala. First of all, I think for most people is to start coming into understanding that we have emotions and allowing them. And often we've learned to repress them and use addictions to do that, which are also coping mechanisms. So when we were a child, we had stuff going on in our family life, and we learned how to deal with that. Sometimes that's by tuning out and disassociating. And as a child, we don't have the intellectual frameworks to deal with emotional trauma. And so there's lots of different language around this. Different cultures, for example, will use different ways to do what they call the soul retrieval. So basically that we have zoned out, tuned out, maybe later on that's turned into getting high, to not feel, to numb out. Maybe it's gone into using sugar, for example, food, to stuff the feelings down, to create a chemical change in the body of blood sugar. We do this with alcohol as well. And often with alcohol, it's so predominant in our culture, in our media, that when you get stressed or when you relax, you open a bottle of something, you have a drink, and it's a coping mechanism. Actually, if you address instead what has made you feel stressed, why you need to relax, why you're out of balance in your life, then you get a whole different understanding about yourself, and you start to free yourself from any codependency. This is essential for the human being who is ready to create freedom for themselves from the health story. So the Conscious Dreamer Day is all about understanding what has created health for us and our ancestors, which we are living the next chapter of at this time. And remembering that today, just show you the calendar. So here we are. We began on the 1st of September here, Red Dragon. We're beginning a whole new 260-day cycle in Virgo. And we began it in waning moon in Gemini, just going into Cancer in the UK. So mindsets, communication, how we've learned how to relate to people through that in the home, Cancer, and how that made us feel. And that creates the trauma patterns in the amygdala. And it doesn't have to be huge events. Remember, as a small child, if an adult who you adored or respected or who you were very dependent on in whatever way, so for example at school, it wouldn't have been good for you to go against this teacher, for example, head teacher, because you were going to see them every day. So of course you didn't want to accept them unless you were coming from a home where that was your norm. You know, then maybe you weren't bothered about upsetting them because that's just how life was for you. You were going to upset people anyway, and that was your coping mechanism, for example. So when an adult shouts at a child who is sensitive, who is an empath, let's say, then that creates trauma. And so it's really essential for the human being who's wanting to do this process now to really understand how this works. The emotional mind is not logical. And so if you use mindfulness as a technique, it will help you be mindful, but it doesn't change how your emotional mind works. And some EFT teachers don't teach this aspect. I was very lucky with my teacher in my very first practitioner. Gwyneth Moss mentioned the emotional mind and the amygdala, and that was the aha eureka moment for me. Was like, wow, okay, I get this. There's a part of me that as soon as I get a pattern match for this behavior in today, based on an emotional trauma in the past, I get triggered and my burglar alarm goes off. Now, I might not be consciously aware of why that happened or where that came from, but once you start to do this process and you really start to work with tapping on your amygdala and you refine your skill, you will learn how every trigger will lead you back to the original event. And then you can use a technique called the movie technique, which will help you clear it off. So yes, it is complex, and yes, there's a lot to it. But to begin with, if you start focusing on yourself and raising your awareness, because that's where we are in the first 13 days, we come down to here. This is all about understanding ourselves, raising awareness in the first 13 days. We're awakening to our survival issues. And our survival issues in our amygdala are based on when we had a fear experience, when we had an upset experience, and how we logged that in there. So we want to start becoming very aware of that, so that today we are on day 3, and this is the conscious dreamer. So we began with Red Dragon, number 1, 1st of September. Yesterday, we had the new learning coming in from Spirit, and there was huge astrology going on yesterday. If you want to read more about that, then go into livepurelight.com, where I've written a big blog about that. And so you can see all the astrology. So I'm not going to try and pack too much information into this here. So today, based on what happened on day 1, 1st of September, and day 2, 2nd of September, day 3 is okay. So we've got that information. So very simply, what is coming up from the past that's creating an emotional trigger for us right now? Now, each of these have their own planet to work with as well. Neptune, which I'm going to talk about in my blog, livepurelight.com, about what's going on with Neptune. White wind is Uranus. What's going on with Uranus? Both of these are in retrograde at the moment, which means we're going back over old storylines around this. We can see this massively on the planet. Most important thing, though, for you, it's all about you. Remember, the focus is about you as a conscious dreamer. You can't affect anybody else. The focus is about you and what you want to create in your life. And the priority is healing the old story. When we heal the old story, then the new story can come in. This is the essential first step. So we can't go to this place of creating heaven on earth without clearing all this other past storyline first. And this happens on a daily basis. So if you decide to explore tapping and start to work every day, just for an hour a day, on what's coming up for you, that's triggering you, in 28 days, you will have created a new neural pathway. And you will be changing your destiny completely. So today's planet is Saturn. And Saturn is, on one level, it's a father figure. It's authority. It's becoming a mature human being who's ready to be a conscious creator. So remembering that up to now, most of the things that we've created have been unconscious. We've been simply following our culture, our framework that we've grown up in, our family dynamic, what's going on in our genes. And so knowing about all that stuff helps us become conscious of, first and foremost, ourselves. What are my patterns? What have I been doing up until the age of around 30? What felt really good, created happiness, stability, security in terms of home, in terms of what I do for a job, in terms of the relationships that I'm in, all of that sort of practical stuff. And if you're getting towards your second Saturn turn, like I am, so I'm 56, so mine will be coming up in the next couple of years, then how do I really want to tune into that and get really specific about what created amazing, fun, loving, heart-opening experiences for me that are healthy? Now, the amygdala also records all of those addictive places. It's not logical. It just wants us to feel good. So, for example, when I was building up to my Saturn return, I had done lots of hedonistic living, as many of my contemporary playmates can attest to. So very hedonistic, involving addictions, alcohol, and getting out of your body. Generally, I think often because maybe we're not really comfortable in having fun, maybe we're shy, maybe we need to take the parental control off, relax the boundaries a bit, stop the mind chatter, all of that sort of stuff. Liberate ourselves in that way. And of course, the music around that time, the dancing, the cultural format that was going on was very much about partying and going to concerts, being around people in a party type experience. So again, people of our own age group, they have very similar planetary patterns as well in some respects. And so we have a shared game plan as conscious dreamers on that level. And each generation brings in that new awareness, that new patterning. And at the same time, we're now at an extremely important pivotal point where we're realizing what our outcomes have been. So we're seeing where we are today based on our choices, our unconscious choices, largely. And maybe we're still doing a lot of behaviors that work for us when we were young people. You see many people are still doing the same things that they did. And of course, the body, as we get older, cannot sustain the same things. Often as young people, we can do lots of things that our body will immediately transmute because it's in its optimum. But as we get older, we have to become more consciously aware and be realistic. And again, this is what this Virgo energy is about: being realistic about where we are, how old we are, how physically fit we are, what we can and what we can't do on a physical level, and keeping ourselves at our optimum by whatever we're putting into ourselves. So if we're putting something in that's poisonous, that is not going to be helpful. And why would we want to do that anyway, really? So imagine yourself in your future. This is so key to today. Tune in. So let's say this time next year, where do you want to be? Do you want to be in the same country? Do you want to be doing the same job? Do you want to be with the same people? And if you choose today, get radical on this, really get radical around, okay, so I've always had this passion, this dream, and I haven't allowed myself to do it. And I'm staying in my comfort zone. I'm just staying in a place of being stuck around this. And this is what's really coming up with this card today, the Tower card. Okay, and I'll put a link below this to explore this more. Okay, so often people see this in tarot as something to be feared. And what I offer you is wherever we've got fear, that's the key. Okay, that's the key to set us free. Virgo is very much about the conditioned mindset, and this is where we need to work now, is to understand how we've been conditioned and to let it go. What I offer you is, with the emotional mind, you cannot let it go without doing this healing work. This is so important to understand as to what underpins how we behave. So if we have created a coping mechanism in the past, so let's say it's alcohol, for example, then that's a learned behavior that is often habitual and has been brainwashed in. We can look at this in a very simple way, is where did we learn this? You know, so often it's with contemporaries, it's, you know, what we do, it's the done thing, we watch it over and over, it gets reinforced on the TV, in films. This is what you do to cope with stress. So first of all, it's understanding that. And for people who take that to excess, often there is a big trauma there underneath that. So people who cannot live without having a drink every day, who cannot cope with life without having something to help them get through, then clearly there's a big issue there around this. And understanding codependency is really important as well. So no matter how much we want to think ourselves, have positive affirmations, look at the future and be positive, underneath, in NLP terms, what we call the meta model that's running the mindset is often coming from a place of lack, from insecurity. So if we've got a fear, for example, that we have to be in a certain relationship, that we have to be in a certain job, that we can't possibly chase our dreams, we can't not go to the pub, you know, we can't be around a certain group of people, then there's always a reason for that. And that's based on a personal experience in our childhood that created a belief around that. So we've had experiences that make us believe that we are not enough. So for example, if somebody you're in a relationship with had an affair, had several affairs, betrayed you, then that is a behaviour of theirs that often we take personally and get upset about, believing that we are not enough. And in that instance, of course, we are not enough for them, because nobody ever is going to fill that void for them. They have a need to do that behaviour. And again, that's often complex. It may be that that was a pattern in their family. That's what they grew up with. That's what happened with their mum and dad. This is so strong, this imprinting model, that this is how it replicates. And it could also be that they have a sex addiction, that they cannot commit to a person, they have intimacy issues, and all of those complex things. But the most important thing for us to recognize for ourselves is that we feel that we are not enough. Even though we intellectually know all of this other stuff, the important difference is to understand that how I feel creates my reality. So to go back to the mind framework again, so day one, we have the magnetic. So whatever was happening for you on day one, that's your law of attraction. That's the reality of where you are right now and what experience you're having based on your beliefs about the world. This is what the universe brings us, and it shows us a reflection of ourselves. Now, again, this is complex, and people often interpret this in a very negative way on the self, and I don't mean that at all. I don't mean that if somebody's doing cruel behavior, it means you've done cruel behavior. I don't see it in that way. I see it that, yes, you may have done cruel behavior, and also it can be that other people have been cruel to you. So it's not a clear-cut projection as used in a lot of psychological terms. This is a whole different way, a whole different system of seeing projections in a much broader, expanded way. We're seeing our holograph, we're seeing our childhood story projected out, and we're also seeing all of our ancestors' stories projected out. The difference is, for the human being who's doing the work on an inner level, as in emotionally healing and repatterning the amygdala by doing that, they get to change their storyline. Now, you can use lots of different forms of healing, Reiki being one of them. And if you actually think about how that works, Reiki does not bring you conscious awareness of these old patterns. And that's the difference. Reiki, all other forms of energy healing are great, doesn't bring you the awareness of the amygdala story there. And that's the difference. That is why working with emotional freedom technique to change your story by healing and clearing the old stories changes this. So once we do that, then we truly can create different behaviors from that space. If we don't do first base and start healing and clearing, then my understanding is the very nature of this framework that I work with means you just stay stuck in the old story. And this is why we're seeing this big storyline on the planet right now. Everyone's seeing their story of fear on the planet. When we go into day 2, it's a new learning, and this is about spirit coming in. The more we do this clearing of survival stories, the more we can embody our goddess. And the more we can be directed, and the more we start to do things that align with health and wealth, as in sovereignty. By the time we get to day 3, which is electric, which is the alchemy day, then we see what thoughts are creating the emotions. So whenever we've got an emotional trigger, it's always about fear and the whole spectrum of that. So the whole spectrum of that around anger, sadness, and all the different layers that we go through. So anger is really a protection, and can also be that this story is getting bigger and bigger because it collects more patterns. It's magnetic, remember. So it keeps creating the same experiences for us until we think, hey, I need to do something about this. Now, if we're going into a coping mechanism of alcohol, for example, or avoidance in some way, disassociating, meditation can be used in this way as an avoidance, as a spiritual bypass. Meditation is great for stopping the story and the thoughts, becoming aware of them floating past. And it's not changing the story in the amygdala. Emotional freedom technique will help you take these thoughts and start to work with them and start to understand your inner child that is telling you the story over and over again, so that you can start to work with your own inner child and you can get clear. You can feel the emotion and you can start to feel freer around soothing yourself with EFT, first of all, so that you don't need to use these coping mechanisms anymore. You don't need to take the edge off. You don't need to get high. And The next card, Mind Oracle, you can come into your emotional center. Now, as a reforming people pleaser, when I first learned emotional freedom technique, I realized, wow, okay, so this is, I can actually feel my emotions and tap on them, on how I really feel. And I don't have to become the behavior that hurt me. I don't have to shout at people. I don't have to get angry. I can, at the same time, allow all those feelings when I tap with myself every day, come into a clear space, and then I can communicate to this person in a different way. So I can come from an emotionally centered way, free of the old story as much as I can at that time. And then I don't create the same dynamic again, because I offer you, this is how it works. It is a spell. It is a time travel. We're traveling back. When we get triggered, we're traveling back to that time before. We're recreating it because there is no time. This is big. This is a huge understanding. Every day we are creating our reality based on what has come before for everyone in our entire ancestral line, right back to the beginning of time, in every single past life we have had. And once we really get this concept, once we really start to work with it alchemically using this technique, life becomes the true dream that we're bringing in. This is the Goddess card for today. As source, we are pure love. All these other stories are part of that love process. Whenever we are not feeling loved, we create a pattern in our amygdala. And that's a great guide to show us what doesn't feel loving for us and how we're blocking our connection to source with this story, as everybody else has done before in our family line in some way. Beliefs around not feeling enough, around not feeling connected, feeling lost, because most people who we grew up with feel the same things. You know, they're all feeling that shadow because that's what happened for them, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, right back to the beginning. And that's not who we really are. So anything that's showing us that, anything that's triggering that, is always connected to our childhood. This is what I offer you. And the more that you start to get ready to face all of that and tap on it, then you'll start to liberate yourself in a very consciously aware way. You'll become very aware of your pattern. And of course, this is in the cosmic codes, it's in the star chart, it's in the 13-year cycles, and it's mind-blowing. It will give you the information exactly on what to work on, which, again, using this process now over 10 years and finally getting to a really practical place with it, it's totally mind-blowing for me, because working with people in this way, we can identify very key patterns that we can work on and release. And to begin with, this journey can be difficult. We can have trust issues, especially trusting ourselves, because again, over millennia, in order to survive, we have come up with all these coping mechanisms. We've overridden our gut instinct. We've put all manner of rubbish into our body, which affects our ability to nurture ourselves, because when we tap on this point, this is the small intestine, meridian, and this is where we absorb our nurturing ingredients from the food that we put into our body. Now, in order for this to work, you don't even need to know that bit to begin with. If you just tap and have the intention, you will do that anyway. You'll start to release and accept. Remember, in this process, the most important thing for you, for I, is to focus on I. What is kind and loving for myself? First, this can be so difficult for so many people. It can be so difficult for women. One of the biggest ego delusions and illusions and fear story is I have to focus on everybody else first. I have to sacrifice myself. I have to put myself last. And of course, all of this is true on so many levels for women where they've got so much stuff going on. And if we don't change that pattern, how is it ever going to change? This is fundamental to the process. So today we have got Sun in Virgo and we've got Moon in Cancer. So again, this is highlighting the home, emotions, how our thoughts make us feel. Where do those thoughts come from? How can I change my situation so that in future I am in a sanctuary space, I'm surrounded by conscious, loving people who are working through their stuff truly, not just intellectually, who are healing. How can I be in a different relationship because I chose to be in a different relationship with myself and take action now on being kind to myself? Often there's loads of denial in the way of that because this is years of programming, years and years and years, not only for us on a personal level, but for our genes over thousands of years as women. So this is tricky. So be gentle with yourself and maybe just start with one thing a day. And I offer you, if you start with tapping every day, then as I said, over 28 days, you'll have a new habit, you'll have a new neural pathway, and you will be in a very different place. So please do give it a go and change yourself. You will change the world. I'm just going to read you the degrees. So we've got Cancer at 27 degrees. A woman giving birth to twins, moving one way and moving another way at the same time, in the same breath, day in and day out, inwardly compelled to take hold of given pairs of opposites and to work them by going into both and finding out how and where and why both cannot be refused, insist on being met. Captivated by your life predicament, always seeing contradictory sides that in some ways cancel each other out, but also unfolding in multiple directions and truly born with a split karma. You have little choice but to cover all the bases, check everything out, and play through each and every side of the situation, consciously identifying with one thing at a time, but subconsciously absorbed in the other thing consistently. prone to self-sabotage, and searching for a lost path through which you can bring the polarities together, serve the whole, and yet be free within the serving and be unattached. Just there to let it all come through without making anything a burden or a self-blaming focus. The charge is removed when the opposites find each other again, and fanaticisms give way to the universal good, met integrally. So just to read you the thought. This is about letting everything shift now. And again, this is so interesting because in the mind signs, there are two linked together by key planets. And the planet of Blue Night is linked with Yellow Warrior, which is the 16th mind sign. And this is the 16th card. So I'm just going to share this with you. Lots of information again on this card. Amazing website. Excuse me. So there we go, in a snapshot, eliminating all that's artificial, false to fact, and no longer useful to them. Usually in a 16-week or 16-month process. So I hope you have an amazing day of connecting to your dream by healing your health story. Lots of love.